Story 1: The Mirror from Another World. When Lisa moved into an old apartment in the city center, she immediately noticed a huge mirror in the bedroom. It covered almost the entire wall, framed by a massive wooden border with intricate carvings resembling intertwined roots. It was clear the mirror had been there since the house was built. There was something magical and alluring about it. From the first day, Lisa felt a strange energy emanating from the mirror. That first night, she slept restlessly and thought she saw something moving in the room. Faint shadows glided across the walls, but she couldn't discern them clearly. In the morning, she dismissed it as exhaustion from the move and decided not to dwell on it. However, with each passing day, she felt increasingly drawn to the mirror, as if it held a mystery she couldn't resist. A week later, she experienced the first truly strange occurrence. Her reflection in the mirror behaved oddly. It hesitated when she raised her hand, then quickly completed the motion as if making up for the delay. Lisa doubted her own perception, dismissing it as her imagination. But it was only the beginning. One night, awakened by a strange crackling sound, Lisa saw a crack on the mirror's surface. But this was no ordinary crack. It moved as if alive, shimmering faintly. Paralyzed with fear, she couldn't tear her gaze away from the spectacle. Quiet whispers emanated from within, barely audible but beckoning. They called her name. Driven by an inexplicable impulse, Lisa reached out to the glass. Her fingers passed through the cold surface as if it wasn't there. Darkness enveloped her instantly, and the world around her transformed. She found herself in a bizarre, infinite mirrored room, surrounded by silhouettes staring directly at her. The next morning, neighbors discovered her apartment door ajar. Lisa was nowhere to be found. Her belongings were untouched, except for the mirror. Those who dared to look into it later reported seeing not only their own reflection, but also a dark silhouette standing behind them, staring straight into their eyes. Since then, the mirror has become the subject of superstition. No one dares to stay in the apartment where it resides. Those who glance into it speak of hearing faint voices, calling them inside. Jerry's Story 2: The Disappearance in the Forest. Anthony and his friends had long planned a camping trip. They chose a spot deep in the woods, far from civilization, where there was no cell service or other people. Local residents warned them about strange happenings in those woods, but the young group laughed it off. "Stories for gullible tourists," Anthony joked. The first day was fun. The group set up camp, built a fire, and sang songs with a guitar. At night, they shared scary stories. But when everyone went to sleep, Anthony heard a peculiar whistling sound coming from the depths of the forest. Peeking out of the tent, he saw a faint glowing light moving between the trees. The light seemed unreal, almost enchanting. Captivated, Anthony stepped out of the tent without waking his friends. He followed the light, which grew brighter as the whistling sound grew louder. It seemed to be leading him to a specific place. Eventually, he arrived at an enormous tree with strange symbols carved into its bark. Beneath the tree lay an old, tattered backpack. Inside, Anthony found a journal. Flipping through its pages, he read about someone feeling pursued in the woods. The final entry was particularly chilling. "They are coming for me. I can't run anymore." At that moment, Anthony realized the surrounding forest had grown unnervingly silent. He looked around and found himself in an unfamiliar area. The trees formed a tight circle around him, and a thick mist enveloped everything. A rustling sound emerged from the mist. Anthony froze. A tall figure with unnaturally long arms and a distorted silhouette appeared before him, moving closer with each step. His heart pounded irritatingly in his chest. not from the freezing wind, but from the knowledge that something new was going to happen to him. His friends searched for him all the next day, but found no trace. When the rescue team arrived, the campsite was deserted, except for the journal Anthony had discovered. His whereabouts remained a mystery. Locals began avoiding that part of the forest even more, sharing eerie tales of missing campers. 3 demonstrators, read from a list of names, were found and murdered. Later, his counterparts remembered seeing campers all the time. Story 3. Hotel Room 13. James was on a business trip in a small town and decided to stay in an old hotel on the outskirts. The building looked cozy despite its age. The receptionist warned him of a peculiar rule. Room 13 was always vacant, and no one was allowed inside. James, a skeptic by nature, smirked at the superstition. Late that evening, his curiosity got the better of him. He approached room 13 and found the door unlocked. Inside, the room was strange. Instead of a bed, there was an antique wooden chair in the center. Black and white photographs adorned the walls, all depicting the same man. A tall, thin figure with empty, soulless eyes. A chill ran down James's spine. As he examined the walls more closely, he noticed the lighting in the photos changing. In one of them, the shadows deepened, as though the background was coming to life. It seemed as though the pictures were becoming sharper with each glance. Suddenly, he heard a faint whisper, as if someone were calling his name. James felt the temperature drop. He decided to leave, but the door slammed shut on its own. The room plunged into darkness, and he was enveloped in pitch-black silence. Then, a faint glow emanated from one of the photographs. The man in the image was no longer staring straight ahead. His gaze had shifted to the side. As James approached the photograph, he realized the man was now looking directly at him, and the background had transformed into a corner of the room. Suddenly, the figure vanished from the photo, and James felt cold breath on the back of his neck. Turning around, he came face to face with the man from the photographs, who stood eerily close, staring into his eyes, and his heart leapt. James tried to scream, but no sound came out. Paralyzed, he felt his body grow numb as the man whispered in an unrecognizable language. The room's light flickered like a faulty bulb, casting erratic shadows. For a minute, James thought he was about to talk, but the pressure detached his lips, causing him to freeze. The next morning, the receptionist found room 13's door locked, its key resting in its usual place. James had disappeared without a trace. Nothing remained in the room except for a strange black and white photograph. It now showed the man with soulless eyes and James sitting behind him on the antique chair. Story 4. Whispers in the Fog. On a dark autumn night, when a dense fog engulfed the small village on the edge of the forest, Emily was hurrying home. She had stayed late in town and now walked briskly along the winding path leading to her house. The moon occasionally broke through the thick clouds, and the only sound was the click of her heels on the damp ground. Suddenly, a strange whisper from deep within the forest caught her attention. It was barely audible, like someone speaking in an unfamiliar language. Emily paused, trying to discern its source, but the whisper fell silent. Thinking it was just her imagination, she quickened her pace. But then she noticed something eerie. Her own footsteps, trailing behind her, began to vanish into the fog. The path led her to an old, long-abandoned house that shouldn't have been there. The windows were shattered, and the door was slightly ajar, as if inviting her inside. The whisper grew louder, drowning out the sound of her breathing. Emily tried to turn away, to leave, but her legs seemed to move forward on their own. Inside, she felt an icy chill that seeped into her bones. Strange paintings hung on the walls, depicting people whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. In the center of the room stood a table, and on it, a leather-bound ancient book. As Emily approached, the whisper transformed into a scream, filled with pain and terror. Her hand involuntarily opened the book, and instantly, a blinding light erupted around her. The next morning, villagers found only her bag on the path. The house she had described to her friends was gone again, and in the forest remained just one item, a book with blank pages. Emily wasn't the first to disappear in this area. The village elders spoke of a legend tied to the forest. Long ago, a witch who cast spells that brought books to life lived there. She claimed many souls, luring them with whispers. It was said that the book found near the missing would curse the next traveler. Story 5. The Nameless Station. Andrew had been a metro driver for 10 years. In that time, he'd grown accustomed to everything: strange passengers, odd noises in the tunnels. But one night, during a late shift, he was assigned an unusual route that included a mysterious station called the Nameless. He had never heard of it before, but orders were orders. The train moved through the empty tunnels. Andrew noticed the radio connection with the dispatcher beginning to cut out. On the monitor, a message appeared. Caution, next station. The Nameless. His heart tightened as the train slowed and stopped at the platform. It looked abandoned. Dim lights flickered, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. When the doors opened, no one boarded, but Andrew felt the temperature in the car drop. He turned and caught a glimpse of a face in one of the windows, pale, with empty eye sockets. Attempts to call the dispatcher failed. The radio emitted only static and strange hissing sounds. In the room, he found Trenton and Templar, inseparable company. What? Suddenly, the doors began opening and closing on their own. Andrew noticed the train seemed to be moving backward, even though he hadn't touched the controls. Silhouettes resembling people flashed by the windows, but they moved too fast and unnaturally, as if gliding through the air. The train came to an abrupt stop in complete darkness. A whispering voice filled the car. "You shouldn't have come here." The lights went out, and Andrew felt an icy touch on his shoulder. But he could see Andrew in the dim light as he settled into the cramped station and the train booted up again. The following morning, the train was found empty at the station, with a strange symbol burned into the control panel. No one could explain where the driver had gone or how the train had returned to the depot by itself.